the quality of experiences and relationships in childhood impact brain development in a really profound way, which was, stood in contradiction to that things are genetic purely and set in stone. So that's the idea of interpersonal neurobiology, is that our experiences are the architects of our minds.
Well, welcome to Mind and Heart. I'm Sister John Dominic, and I'm so happy to have with me again my guest, Dr. Karen Villa. And for those people who are joining us maybe for the first time, I'd like for you, Karen, just to give us a little of your background and introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist. I've been practicing for over 25 years, but I did the majority of my training in the decade of the brain, which was in the 1990s when George Bush funneled all of this funding into neuroscience research because we had all these new neurodiagnostic tools. So I finished my training about the time I was having my own kids, and I took a lot of these interpersonal neurobiology tools and used them to help give me a map to raise my own children.
You've done a fantastic job because I know your children. So I think what you have to offer, I think that's the wonderful thing for the people that are listening, is that what you have to offer is something that's kind of, it's been practiced in the field. Mm-hmm. And I think what I bring to this are kind of my over 30 years in Catholic education. But what I love and what I find just so exciting is that with this discovery, this science that we know about the brain and the brain development coincides with our soul, this mind and heart, and that when we talk about living a virtuous life, really which helps us to live the good life, the habit of doing good so we can be balanced, that when we're living this way, we have a healthy mind, so healthy mind, healthy heart, and it's just a well-rounded, balanced person. And that's what we'll be talking about today, is balance, but I think maybe we should back up a little bit to give our audience, our listeners, a little background and maybe a few important points that you think that maybe they should learn to kind of have in their mind as to kind of recap.
The whole concept, the whole field of interpersonal neurobiology, what so intrigued me about it during my training is that it really lays out a developmental pathway to mental health in adulthood, that the quality of experiences and relationships in childhood impact brain development in a really profound way, which, stood in contradiction to that things are genetic purely and set in stone. So that's the idea of interpersonal neurobiology, is that our experiences are the architects of our minds. And the Virtue program, I think, really integrates a whole experience that children are exposed to that supports and promotes their brain development.
Yeah, and I think the one book that we've talked about too, is with the Yes Brain by Dr. Dan Siegel, who's really been really a scientist and
he's a neuropsychiatrist.
Okay.
So he originally started in psychiatry, and then when all of this research was coming together from so many different disciplines, he really integrated it into an understanding that the brain grows in relationship to other people. Our attachment is important, and the experiences that we have from day to day are really important in brain development. So he's really, launched this field with a couple of other scientists who were there in the beginning. And in this beautiful way, he took this hardcore science and translated it into everyday tools that parents can use. So his work is really, really well done.
Right. And I think we've talked about, there's like the whole brain child, there's brainstorm, but in particular, what we're kind of unpacking here is Yes Brain. So what would you say is the difference between, this is going to be like layman's terms, okay? Yeah. So the difference between the yes brain and a no brain.
So it might be helpful to start with definition of the mind.
Oh, good.
That a mind, good. We didn't have a definition of mind when we came to the decade of the brain. We were really studying structure and function of the brain. And we realized that mind was energy and information flow in and out of the brain.
Okay.
That was this embodied and relational process. So a yes brain is somebody who's integrated and has good information flow in and out of their mind. So they can receive learning and experiences from their environment, and they can construct responses thoughtfully, mindfully, to engage with the world around them.
And so then when you have the no brain is when we come into this. We've talked about, the last show we talked about the importance of the river of integration, where you have on one side chaos, on the other side rigidity.
So the river itself would be the yes brain, right? Where
yes.
things are flowing smoothly along.
Yeah.
But when somebody's not operating from an integrated perspective, they can either be very chaotic, so that would be impulsivity and hyperactivity, anxiety, or they can become rigid, which is very stuck and stubborn and repetitive, so obsessive compulsive kinds of things, or school refusal would be kind of a rigid response to the environment.
And so I'm sure if there's any parents or teachers that are listening, they're like, okay, let's get some strategies. But before we get to that, what I'd like to do is, let's paint a little bit bigger picture, and we're looking at maybe if we could unpack when we understand what by, the acronym BRIE, so what that would mean. And then also, before we actually get to unpacking balance, we'll talk a little bit about a healthy mind platter. Okay. So let's do the first BRIE first. Yes.
So Dr. Siegel likes to use acronyms, and in his Yes Brain book, he is talking about these parenting tools and skills that parents want to cultivate in their children to, arrive at a yes brain. And so the acronym is BRIE, and the 4 letters stand for balance, which is the ability to regulate your brain and your body, not become too chaotic or too rigid. And that's a really important one we're going to look at today because that informs all the others. And then the other 3 are resilience, so the ability to maintain that balance in the midst of challenge or disappointment or mistakes. And then insight, which is the ability to turn inward and understand your own internal world. And then the last one is empathy, which is the ability to take the perspective of another person and care about what's happening to them.
So when I hear you talking, I'm immediately in my kind of virtue brain, I'm thinking, balance is temperance, resilience is fortitude, insight is prudence. And then when we talk about empathy, I see that related to the virtue of justice. But
it's really remarkable.
I know it really is. I mean, you think
cardinal virtues.
God is good, and we can see that. Good. And one of the big things too, we hear so much about health and keep our body healthy. But I think understanding how would we describe this healthy mind platter? That we want to. There's things that we can actually do to keep our minds healthy, and then which obviously would have a positive impact on our bodies,
right, and our brain development and our brain health. So in this information age, when everything is so complex and we're pulled in so many different directions, I think it's been really wonderful that Dr. Siegel came up with the healthy mind platter, because with all of this overstimulation, we have to be very mindful about balancing our lives, because it's not balanced naturally. So he developed this healthy mind platter and really talks about them like mental nutrients for your brain. So if you have these things embedded in your daily life, you really are nourishing your mind and body in a way that keeps it healthy and keeps it mentally healthy.
So why don't you go through
all of
for everyone? Yeah, exactly. Just for the normal, not everyone is living in a monastery or a convent. Okay, so you guys have it harder than I do. I mean, if I don't have a healthy mind platter, I'm in trouble. It's my own fault, So
ours too.
I know, but you've got more distractions coming at you.
There are plenty of them. Yeah. So I'm going to start with, there's 7 of them, and maybe it would be good just to list them first.
Okay.
So there is sleep time, there is physical time, downtime, time to focus, time to play, time to turn inward, and then time to connect. If you can have those in your daily life, you're really supporting good brain growth, brain strength, and brain function. So sleep time is maybe first because it's so critical to brain health. And we very much see that there's a strong correlation between good sleep and good behavior during the day. But sleep is really important to consolidate our learning. There's a lot of thinking that's going on even in sleeping, and it's consolidating what we have experienced, recovering from what we've experienced during the day, and consolidating anything we've learned during the day. So that's a really important piece of the healthy mind.
It is important to sleep on it. I find sometimes, if I do that and I wake up in the morning, I just have clarity, so
right.
There really is truth.
Right, and coming from a rested, recovered mind.
Exactly.
The next one is physical time. So this is the idea that when you are exercising your body, even getting it to an aerobic level, you are delivering good blood flow to the central nervous system. So it keeps your body physically healthy, but it's very important in brain growth to support it from a nutrient standpoint and the ability to carry away debris or toxic buildup in the brain. So physical time really helps with that. And then the next one is downtime. And downtime is where you're not doing anything.
That's nice, yeah.
And where do people find that these days if you don't go especially looking for it? Downtime is very important in just recharging the
Right.
mind.
So let me ask you this. When we talk about, sometimes people say, I need this, I need the downtime, so I'm going to just play my game or whatever. But then your mind's active, if you're doing Candy Crush or, I don't know, maybe I'm aging myself or whatever it may be. But
right.
Is it depend on the person or the individual, or is it just something that's helping them just kind of relax? I don't know.
I think if they find that relaxing, that's a fine activity. Yeah. But again, from a virtue standpoint, everything in moderation, right?
Yeah.
And these video games and game playing and, surfing social media, it creates a very passive mind.
Yeah, right.
And we're wanting this to be an active and engaged mind. Too much of that can lead to passivity, rigidity. And then on the other side, it's so overstimulating. Right. To have this, constant visual input that it can lead to chaos.
Yeah, so everyone's different. Some people, it may be something like knitting or woodworking. That's just something, that kind of refreshes.
It would be refreshing, but that might be something like focus time.
Right,
so
okay.
Every day we need to have places where we are concentrating on something and seeing it through from beginning to end, and we're not multitasking. And something like a woodworking project or, learning about a new concept would be a way to focus. And from a brain standpoint, this really strengthens neuronal connections to have good focus time every day. And outside of that focus time, it just leads to more clarity of mind and clearer thinking. So focus time is important.
Important too, right?
And then
playtime.
Playtime is really important, to just be spontaneous and have new experiences and creative experiences.
It's like when you're growing up building the fort in the woods,
I know,
or just
right?
Those fun.
And then we adults don't get to playtime.
Cards. Well, the sisters, one thing we definitely do is we play lots of cards or different board games or things like that.
So then the last one I think we have is time for connection. So this is the idea that we take the time every day to sit down and have conversation, to connect with the people around us. And I know Dr. Siegel would add time to connect to nature, time to give back to the world, and just extend ourselves in a generous way to the world around us. And I think the family dinner is a nice way to do that. Board games are a nice way to do that.
To restore that. And then I think the other one would be the time in, which we've also talked about.
So time in is taking the time every day to stop and kind of look in on your inner world and be reflective about your thoughts and your feelings. Any sensations that you're having. For children, they might get butterflies in their stomach, and it's good for them to know that that's a sign of nervousness. So we're, trying to get people in touch with their inner worlds from a mind and a body standpoint. And then from brain, what the research shows that taking time in every day specifically builds these integration pathways in the brain. So integration is all the different parts of the brain working well together. And there are certain pathways that connect, say, the back of our brain to the front of the brain, or our upstairs brain to our downstairs brain. And these time-in approaches build those integration pathways. So then what you find outside of time-in is that a child is better integrated for the rest of their day. That's why they're so important. And the fact that you do the Lectio Divina in the midst of a child's school day, or they're in the chapel having adoration or journaling, some of the journaling work that you've done with them is really critical to building those integration pathways, which really integration is, where mental health comes from.
And I think too, what you mentioned is so important, just to have some acknowledgement of just the feelings, or like I'm having like butterflies, or this is anxiety, then you can begin to identify maybe what the source of that anxiety is. So it's not like you're controlling it, and it's not necessarily controlling you. You just begin to learn those skills during that time, and not to be afraid to acknowledge whatever it may be.
That's such an important point, that without this time in to understand their inner world, children do feel like things are just happening to them. And when they can reflect, it starts to put them back in charge of their experiences.
And when we go through it, because we're going to talk through the strategies, I'll kind of interject a little bit and give examples of the virtues and what we're teaching in the virtue program, so that we can see this connection. So what are the groups that we have for the strategies?
So I tried to break the strategies down into ages and stages, because I think that's important. There are different developmental tasks at every stage. So I have 0 to 5, which is really before you and school see them, but that age is so foundational. And then there's what we call latency age, when a child's instincts get kind of quiet. They call it latency because they kind of go underground, and it's a quiet time, and it's really important, a good time for learning. So that's 6 to 9 or 10. And then the instincts resurface during pre-adolescence and adolescence. So then I broke it down into middle school years, so 10 to 15, I'll say. So that's the first stage of puberty, and that's why I broke it down that way. And then 16 and beyond.
Oh, that's good. Well, these will be very helpful, and I know our listeners and parents and teachers are going to be very eager to learn about each of those different strategies at the age levels.